This is a new and improved version of the first in a series of brief shiurim classes about the history of Jewish law, Halacha. I will be speaking about the traditional view of how Halacha developed. I will not be dwelling on the historicity of this subject, at least in the earlier periods. Rather, I will be focusing on the assumptions made by the rabbis of the Talmud and later sources, which are necessary to understand in order to study Talmud and related literature. In general, I will not be citing sources in these first shiurim. Those wishing to examine sources are invited to contact me. And contact information will be given at the end of the video. We'll make a little line with my email address on it. So let me be clear. I'm going to try to teach you about certain assumptions that were made by the people who wrote the Talmud and people in the rabbinic world who continue to this day to study the Talmud. So let's start at the beginning. According to the Torah itself, Moses goes up to Har Sinai, to Mount Sinai, to receive the commandments, the mitzvot, from God. Now, according to rabbinic tradition, Moshe actually receives far more than just the Ten Commandments. According to some opinions, Moshe received the entire Torah itself at Sinai. According to others, he received all of the commandments and all of their details, but not every single word of the Torah. And then, according to some people, he received the commandments in their general form, and then he receives the details of the commandments over the next 40 years in different places while they're wandering. So the details are given to him in part in the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. That was in the Mishkan, the portable tabernacle that was used for the service of Hashem in the wilderness. And then some other ones were given, some of the other details were given to him at Arvot Moav, that's the plains of Moab. That's where the children of Israel are in what's present-day Jordan, right before Moshe dies and right before the children of Israel go into the land of Israel. So we will discuss these concepts in later shiurim, but just so you understand, in general, there is a notion that Moses receives the commandments of the Torah at Sinai in some form. Now, tradition further tells us that Moshe received not only the written Torah, but the oral Torah as well. Now, what's the written Torah? The written Torah is only what we find in a written Torah scroll. I'm going to show you a sample from a sheet that I wrote in a Sefer Torah. And so what you see here are just Hebrew words. You'll notice, those of you who know how to read Hebrew, there's no vocalization, there's no nikud, none of the dots that tell you where the vowel, what the vowels are. There's also no indication for the beginning and end of verses, and there's no indication, for example, for where the beginning and the end of a Parshat HaShavua, of a weekly Torah portion are. It's just the words. Now there are some indications of like sort of paragraphs, but we're not going to talk about that. Those are part of the Torah. Those do show us certain aspects of how the Torah is divided up in the literary sense. But basically the Torah is pretty bare bones. There's not that much in there except for the words themselves. Everything else that we know about the Torah, we know through the oral tradition. So the oral tradition includes how to read the words, how to break up the sentences, and then what the words mean, and different layers of meaning, which we call midrash, and so on and so forth. And all of those parts of the Torah are part of the oral Torah. We don't see them written directly in the Torah. Now, additionally, Moshe also, according to tradition, receives certain laws that are not written in the Torah, and they're not actually talked about in the Torah in any direct fashion at all. And these, the Gemara, the Talmud refers to them as Halacha Moshe Sinai. So, I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them is the halachot about tefillin, So, Jewish men, generally in the morning, during the weekday, put on tefillin on their head and on their arm. And the Torah does talk to us about this idea. It says, for example, V'hayu l'totafot beineinecha, and so forth, but it doesn't tell us what that means. Halacha l'Moshe miSinai tells us that we need to make tefillin by writing out certain parshiot on parchment and rolling them up and putting them into special boxes that are made out of leather. All of those things that we know that from Halacha l'Moshe miSinai. We don't really learn almost any of that out of the Torah itself. Nonetheless, for the purposes of the way Halacha works, those laws that are called Halacha l'Moshe miSinai have the weight of Torah law. It's as if they were written in the Torah itself. Now, Moshe receives, as we say, the written Torah and the oral Torah and Halacha l'Moshe miSinai. So let's talk a little bit about this oral Torah. So, the oral Torah is supposed to be oral. It's not supposed to be written down at all. Just as the written Torah has to be written the way I showed it to you on a piece of parchment in a special way by qualified sofrim, such as myself, and you're not allowed to learn the written Torah except from a written copy. The same way, you're not allowed to learn the oral Torah except orally. You're not supposed to write it down at all. However, what does that tell us then about the nature of the oral Torah? The oral Torah is something that is not fixed in the same way that the written Torah is fixed. Even the way I'm speaking to you now, if you were to read what I'm saying on a piece of paper, you would be putting the intonation in, you would be putting the emphasis in. You are missing something when you read it from a book or read it from a piece of paper that you don't get when you transmit orally. So there is an idea in the oral Torah that yes, I'm supposed to transmit as closely as possible the same way I heard it from my Rebbe, from my teacher. That's how I'm supposed to transmit it. But of course, each person that transmits the oral Torah is adding something of himself to that transmission. So something is very dynamic about the oral Torah that's not in the written Torah. But the written Torah is like an anchor. It's something that never changes. And so we know that there's always something that we can come back to refer to, that never changes. Now there are other aspects to the oral Torah. Let's say you're a judge, and you've been learning this Torah, and somebody comes and asks you a question, and actually you read this whole Torah and you go through all the oral Torah that you remember, and you don't know the answer to this question. Part of the oral Torah also includes methods of learning midot that are called midot hadrash, that give you tools to understand and to be able to answer questions that are not written in the Torah itself. These midot hadrash become the basis for many, many halachic decisions throughout history. I think we're going to stop this shiur here for now, and I will pick up on this point next time about what happened to the midot hadrash and how they affect the oral Torah. Thank you for listening.